Hey there, I'm Amy from thecrazycraftlady.com and welcome to today's edition of How Many Easter Bunny Wreaths Are Really Too Many Easter Bunny Wreaths? So I just got back from Dollar Tree yesterday and they had these super cute bunny wreath forms and I just thought they were super adorable. I'd seen them before, but I've never seen them in my Dollar Tree. So I picked up 4 of them and I'm going to try to see how many different styles of wreaths I can make. So this is very similar to the roundup that I did last year with Valentine heart wreath forms. I'm going to do the exact same thing, only for Easter with Easter bunnies. So let's get making. Okay, first things first. It breaks my heart when I pick up a dollar store supply and people say, Amy, they don't have it at my Dollar Tree. What am I supposed to do now? So I'm going to give you a quick alternative if you don't have the bunny wreath form. So bear with me here. All right, so here's my alternative for you. This is the wreath form from the Dollar Tree. And it's not all that dissimilar from a regular wreath form, except for it has bunny ears. So all we're going to do is take a different wreath form and add bunny ears to it. Now this one is from outer ring to outer ring is about 9 1/4 inch. And then the ears are about 8 inches tall. Yeah, 8 inches tall. So your options are Dollar Tree sells these 2 packs. These are 8 inch, so it's a little bit smaller, or just for reference, I have this one from the craft store, it's 12 inches. So it depends how big or small you want to go, or you could try to go to the craft store and find a 9-inch wreath form. But I'm just going to use this one, so it's going to be a little bit smaller, but we're going to achieve the same effect. Then all you need is floral wire. This comes from Dollar Tree, and the Dollar Tree stuff is pretty thin, which makes it easy to cut, but then you're going to have to double or triple it up. Okay, so because these ears are 8 inches tall, let's kind of guesstimate here. I would say at least 16 inches for your length of wire. I'm gonna go with 18 just to be on the safe side. So I'm gonna measure a length of wire that's 18 inches long, and then I'm gonna fold my wire in half so that I'm doubled up. And then I'm gonna go ahead and triple this because this is really thin wire. So if you're using a thicker, they come in all different gauges, right? So if you're using a thicker wire from the craft store, you may only have to double this up. And depending on what you're putting on the wreath form, right? Yeah, I'm gonna triple. You could quadruple it if you're putting something really heavy on it, but I'm just doing this as an example. So then snip. And then your tripled up wire gets folded in half and kind of made into the shape of a bunny ear. And then I'm just going to take this and twist it onto my wreath form. And then I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process to make my second bunny ear. All right, and then you can just kind of shape and twist your wire ears, and you can slide them back and forth however you want them to be. But I think this is a pretty close dupe. So dollar store and my kind of DIY version. Like I said, you can quadruple, quintuple, however thick of this floral wire you want, depending on like what type of item or how heavy an item you're going to add to this wreath. If you're just adding like wrapping it in fabric, this would probably be fine. And like I said, this is really thin wire. This is Dollar Tree stuff. So if you want something even more heavy duty, I would use floral wire from the craft store. That's a bit thicker of a gauge, but that's my hopefully solution for those of you who can't find this particular wreath form at Dollar Tree. Also, they usually do sell these on their website, but the problem is you never know what the minimum quantity is going to be. I've seen a minimum quantity of as low as 4, but I've also seen items where the minimum quantity is like 36. So I don't know what you would do with 36 of these guys, but always check that out too. But now we're going to get crafting. All right, first up, we are going to start with a floral spring wreath using these roses from Dollar Tree. And ideally, I would be using a foam wreath form for this, but they don't have foam bunny wreath forms. So we're going to make this work on a wire wreath form by weaving some twine that I also bought at Dollar Tree in and out through like the spokes of this, just the circle part of the wreath form. And this is going to give my flowers and leaves something to stick to. So just kind of weave in and out, over, under, all the way around the wreath form. It doesn't have to be perfect or even or anything like that, just something to create a little bit more stability on that backer. And I'll show you here in a second why that's important. But before we add the flowers, it's time to cover the ears. And I have this chenille type yarn. It's also from the Dollar Tree. It was in the craft supply section, but you can use any type of yarn that you want. Tie a double knot at the base of one ear and just start wrapping. I kind of like did an over-under technique. So I would wrap like 10 times in one direction and then I'd go underneath and wrap in another. Just kind of like in my mind, I didn't want like this sliding around too much. I don't know if that made sense or not, but that's what I did. And so just keep wrapping until you get, I would say like 2/3 of the way up the ear. And then it gets kind of tricky because it's getting more narrow and less wide in that last third. And so the yarn is going to want to slip off and that's not going to work very well. So you're just going to grab a little bit of hot glue and put a couple dabs on the wire at like every 1/2 inch or so, and then wrap a little bit with the yarn and then add a little bit more hot glue and then wrap a little bit more with the yarn and add a little bit more hot glue. And just be careful. You want to make sure that none of that wire or hot glue pokes through. You want everything covered in yarn. So it's a little bit of trial and error, but not too bad. And then it's just a little tricky finishing off the very point of that ear and getting all that yarn to stay in place. So kind of wrap it carefully and be generous with the hot glue and don't burn your fingers. And then repeat the process on the second ear, but you don't need to see me do that. So we're going to skip ahead and add the flowers. So now that I have all that twine, I have something for the hot glue and my flowers to stick to. So just disassemble the flowers from the stems. You're going to throw away the stems, but keep a handful of those leaves for filling in the spaces. Be generous with your hot glue and apply it to the base of the flower and then stick it into one of the gaps between the twine and the wreath form. The first couple are a little wobbly because they're only sticking to the twine, but once you get going, the hot glue on the flowers will not only stick to the twine, but it will also stick to the flower next to it. So I just stuck flowers between the first and the second rung and between the second and the third rung. So within those two gaps, I just kind of alternate back and forth. But these are just little tea roses from Dollar Tree, and I believe I used 5 stems of flowers for this. Most of them were pink, but my Dollar Tree didn't have enough, so I had 1 stem of pink and white. But to use whatever color you want, I just really liked the way this pink on like these roses matched the pink kind of in that yarn.
And so once you fill in all the way around the wreath with your flowers, then you can go in, and this is optional, but you can add some of the leaves back in to fill in kind of some of the gaps and just add another layer of texture and color. So same thing, you're just going to stick a little hot glue on the base of that leaf cluster and stick it in between the flowers. I also like to do, like, sometimes it'll just be one set of leaves, and sometimes I'll put two sets of leaves right next to each other and kind of alternate just to vary it up a little bit. That's it, and then you can finish this off with a bow if you would like. I just have, these are like giant rolls of holiday ribbon that I bought on clearance after Christmas at Michael's, but use really whatever you like. And this was kind of trial and error for me. I think I ended up cutting this too big to begin with, and I had to cut it down to size afterwards. But you just layer a couple pieces of ribbon and then go ahead and tie them in the center with another piece of ribbon. You just kind of tie them together. I always like to err on the side of caution with these types or with bows that have tail ends to cut them larger than you would think you would need them to be, because you can always trim them shorter later, but you can't add length on after. But just tie that with like a simple knot and secure it in the back. And then you can hot glue that to the top of your wreath. So I just hot glued it right there in the center between the two bunny ears. Easy peasy, super cute, a little floral spring wreath for Easter. Okay, second one that we're gonna make is kind of a nautical theme. So recently Dollar Tree's had these like fat quarters, these little scrap fabric bundles, and I happened to find 3 of them in this navy and white check pattern. So I use that for my rag wreath that I'm going to make here. But if your Dollar Tree has different patterns, feel free to use a different pattern of fabric, or just go to the fabric store and get a cut of fabric or a couple of fat quarters. So I ended up cutting my fabric into strips that were about, so I just unfolded this piece of fabric and cut it in half. So it was about like 5 1/4 inches long. So each of my fabric pieces that I cut were about 5 1/4 by 1.5 inches, give or take. This is not, I was not about to cut out my, like, bust out my rotary cutter and like get super technical and super precise here. I just kind of ballparked it. Like once I measured out the first couple of cuts, it was just, I said, you know, close enough, good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially on a wreath like this. And so I just cut a bunch of strips of fabric, and then I started on the inner ring, and you kind of fold the fabric together and then tie it in a knot. And I'm not gonna lie, this wreath probably start to finish took me close to 1.5 hours. This was the most labor-intensive, tedious one of them all, but luckily I am rewatching The Crown season 1 on Netflix, so I had that to keep me company. I always like a good podcast or a good Netflix series when I'm working on some of these projects that take a little while longer. I do find it easiest when tying these ties on your fabric to lay each strip of fabric flat face down and then fold it in thirds, what my kids would call hot dog style, so like vertical thirds. And this way you have a better chance of more of the front or good side of the fabric showing than the bad side, like the faded side. So if you fold it into like little tubes in thirds, you'll get a better finished outcome. But you just keep tying. Tie, tie, tie. So fill in that whole first rung, and you want them to be pretty close, especially like on this first rung. You want to make sure that most of that wire is covered. And then I'm going to speed this up. You do not need to see all this. It's once you've seen me tie one of these, you've seen it all. But once I got that first rung completely filled, Then I moved on to the middle rung. So yes, I did add some ties to the middle rung of the wreath form, but not nearly as many as I did on the first one. I would say I did maybe a fourth or a third of what I did on the inner rung on the middle one. It was just kind of to fill in the gaps. And then I went in and I added quite a bit more on the outer rung. So you can, if you fill in the outer rung and the inner rung a lot, you can kind of be more skimpy on the middle one. And then flip it over and you can kind of tuck all those tail ends to the front of the wreath so that everything's facing forward. Now it's time to decorate the ears, and because this blue and white just was kind of feeling nautical to me, I used nautical jute rope from the dollar store. You're going to need a total of 3 packets of rope for this, so 1.5 per ear. And this is similar to the yarn in that the first 2/3 is super slick and the last third, top third of that ear is a little trickier. So you're going to use a lot of hot glue here, and you're just going to hot glue that rope in place, making that initial loop. And then you're just going to keep looping around and around and around. And I hot glued every loop together. I didn't want to risk, just because this rope is not as flexible or forgiving as the yarn. I really, every time I looped it, it didn't want to stay put. So I really was methodical about hot gluing each loop into place and holding it into place until the hot glue had dried, so that I had no gaps in my coverage and I didn't have any of the wire poking through. And then by the time I got about 2/3 of the way up, I ran out of my first length of rope. So I just kind of hot glued that down. Make sure you end it on the back. You don't want it to be on the front side because you'll have a funny tail end poking through. And then just hot glue that second piece of rope. And this actually worked out perfectly. I used 1.5 lengths of rope on the first ear and I used 1.5 lengths of rope on the second ear. So 3 total. And then as I got further up into the second ear, I found myself having to flip the wreath over and kind of glue each row of rope together because it tended to want to slide like upwards. And so then I had gaps where the wire was showing. So every row or two, flip it over. So you're not only gluing the front and the back loop or row of the loop together, you're also vertically stacking the rows and hot gluing them together as well. But always hot glue it on the back so you don't have funky pieces of hot glue showing. And then kind of cut that tail end off and tuck it in and hot glue it really well to the top of the tip of the ear. And then I'm going to skip the second ear because you saw the first one, it's the same process. But then to finish it off, so like I said, I used 3 bunches of rope. So I used a 4th one and I just used a tiny little piece of it to tie a simple bow, and I hot glued that to the bottom left-hand corner of my finished rag wreath. Okay, third up, I went with my trusty mop heads. I did this on a heart-shaped Valentine wreath last year, and it's the same method. So for this, you need 4 mop heads, and they're the fuzzy kind, and this is gonna get kind of messy, but you know, the end result is super cute. So you just lay the mop head flat and apply liberally a bunch of hot glue and fold the 2 long ends of the mop head over the wreath form and secure in place. So you're just wrapping the wreath form with these mop heads. So for the circle part of the wreath, that's like pretty straightforward. You're just using a full piece of that mop cover. But then when you kind of get to the end of that, so you're using 2 full ones on this wreath, the circle part, and then you're going to cut about a half of a mop cover to finish off the rest of that circle. And then once you're done with that, it's time to move on to the ears. And because those are skinnier, you want to find the center part and try to cut carefully so you're not cutting a lot of those tail ends. Find that center where that seam is between the fuzzy rows and use just a half. So cut vertically. And then same method, hot gluing and wrapping the mop head around the earpiece. So like I said, this is messy. And so once you get all of the wreath form covered with this white fuzzy fabric, give it a good shake out because there will be little pieces that will be falling off. It's just the way that these like mop covers are assembled. And when you cut them, they just get a little messy. And then I just made a very simple bow. I found this check ribbon at Dollar Tree along with the twine. So I cut 4 lengths of each ribbon and I stacked them and then wrapped them in the center a few times around and tied it in the back with a bow using this baker's twine. And then once I set that in place, I decided I wanted like one more layer of detail. So I added just a simple bow made out of doubled up twine on top of that and hot glued it in place. So a cute, super cute, fuzzy little bunny wreath there for you for Easter. And then my 4th wreath, I was getting a little bit wreathed out at this point. I'm not gonna lie, this was not my favorite, but I'm gonna share it with you anyway. I started by wrapping the entire wreath form in this burlap kind of ribbon. It's leftover from Christmas for Michael's, but use whatever you want. I've seen this type of ribbon at Dollar Tree before, but I think it's cheaper to buy these bigger rolls on clearance when you can find them. And so I started by hot gluing the tail end of this one in place and wrapping all the way around the circle part of the wreath. And be careful to get in between the ears there too, because you want to cover all of the metal wreath form. And then you can move on and wrap the ears. I feel like this is kind of where the wheels came off the wagon with this project, but I'm going with it. I was tired. 4 wreaths in a day is a lot. I don't think I will do 4 wreaths in a day again. But it's kind of wrapped over, under, like all the way around, and you kind of got to play with the angles and on the back side kind of pinch the ribbon into place. It's nice that this is a wired ribbon, so you have a little bit more freedom to pinch any extra slack on the back of the ears and kind of hot glue in place as you go. But I just wrapped each of the 2 ears. Looking back, I feel like it looks kind of bandaged. I don't know. It looks like a mummy. They look like mummy ears. I'm not sure how I feel, but we're going with it. And then to finish it off, I grabbed these foam carrots that when I ordered these carrots, I ordered them like a month ago from the Dollar Tree website. I ordered like a case of them because I knew I was going to make a bunch of craft projects. And this was before they did their price increase, so I got 4 for $1. But now I feel like I see them on their website and it's a 6-pack. And of course, now their prices are $1.25. So I don't know. You might see it in a 4-pack, you might see them in a 6-pack. I don't know what to say there. All I know is that I used 21 carats on this wreath. I feel like if you only had 5 packets of 4 and you wanted to get away with using 20, you could probably stretch them out and make that work too. But just add a dab of hot glue to the back of like the middle of each carat and apply them all the way around your little bunny wreath form there. And then I just finished this wreath off with a simple bow, like a basic simple bow, nothing fancy, and I just kind of hot glued that to the bottom of my wreath. But that's it. That's my 4 wreaths that I made in one day, or in the case of you watching this video, in about 30 minutes. Thanks for seeing it through to the end and watching this video. If you have a moment, let me know in the comments which Easter Bunny wreath is your favorite. Until next time, happy making.